Shalom, thanks for joining me. Chapter 33. I almost did that in the last video, but I think that video was a little too long. So this video, chapter 33, there's two very important things in here. Well, for one thing, the entire chapter is basically about the description of all the places that the Israelites went while they were 40 years in the wilderness. And it's interesting because it describes it in verse 1 as the stages of the journey as they left Egypt and went through all the wilderness, and now they're up here to this point where they're ready to cross the Jordan and to conquer the Holy Land. So and then it goes on and talks about this, but it's very interesting if you look very quickly at verse 4. There's a fascinating statement in here. It says in verse 4, while the Egyptians were burying those among whom Adonai had killed all their firstborn, remember that was the 10th plague, the last plague, death of the firstborn, but it says this, Adonai had also executed judgment on their gods. Adonai executed judgment on their gods, their gods, their deities, the 10 plagues inflicted upon Egypt. Each individual plague was a unique judgment upon individual gods that the Egyptians had, and all the different things that they worshiped and paid attention to. What God was doing was judging their gods. And as if you go back and look at the beginning of Exodus, when Moses went to Pharaoh and God had told Moses this, the reason why I'm doing this, because I want Pharaoh and I want the Egyptians to know who I am. And that's the purpose of these 10 plagues, particularly the last plague, was to set Israel free from slavery, and it worked. So they move on. If you go down, all the way down to verse 50, just skip on down because it's just a list of all the different places where they went. Nothing particularly outstanding in there unless you just want to find it. And where it'd be a real challenge to try to follow that on a map because many of these places are nowhere found. Have no idea where many of these places are. We just know they're somewhere in the Sinai Peninsula, wandering around for 40 years. It'd be hard to do that, by the way, but they did. But verse 50, now this is very significant. And this is another one of those hard portions of Scripture. Okay, so be prepared for this. Verse 50, Adonai spoke to Moshe in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho. He said to tell the people of Israel, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you are to expel all the people living in the land from in front of you. Destroy all their stone figures. Destroy all their metal statues. And demolish all their high places. A high place was a common form of worship even for the Israelites. And even for the patriarchs before the Torah and before Israel even became Israel. Anybody that wanted to worship a deity of any kind, including Yahweh, you would go to the top of a hill, nearby hill, that's called a high place, and there you would offer a wine offering, a libation, maybe a grain offering. You might sacrifice an animal and make a burnt offering, and you would say prayers, and there you would worship God or a God at the high places. Now, you got to understand that what God has done while Israel is in the wilderness is given them a tabernacle to worship in. But for centuries, people have been going to high places to worship God as they saw fit, based on their own conscience, based on the habits, based on the culture, based on how it's done. But God is teaching his people. You don't worship like other people do. You worship the way I tell you to worship. You worship in the tabernacle. You worship through the sacrificial system. You don't go to any old place and do it just because it's a high place. But by the way, if you read the rest of the Old Testament, that's a habit the Israelites never got out of, going to the high places and sacrificing to false gods. They never got out of this habit. It's a terrible thing. So here's God telling them, when you go there, destroy these high places, because up on the top of these hills, there's going to be stone pillars that are standing up, and they are part of pagan worship. There's going to be stone altars laying there, and that's a part of pagan worship. And there's going to be other places, other things, artifacts there. You are to destroy all of that. So he said, destroy all of these idols, destroy all these false gods, including destroying the high places, which are the places where these false gods are worshipped. So he said, drive out the inhabitants. This is verse 53. Drive out the inhabitants of the land and live in it. For I have given the land to you to possess. You will inherit the land by lot according to your families. You're to give more land to the larger families and less to the smaller ones. Wherever the lot falls to any particular person, that will be his property. You will inherit according to the tribes of your ancestors. But if you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land from in front of you, then this is important, pay attention to this. If you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land from in front of you, then those you allow to remain will become like thorns in your eyes and stings in your sides. They will harass you in the land where you are living. And in this event, I will do to you what I intended to do to them. That's an interesting verse. God is telling the Israelites to do something really hard. You destroy all of their idols. You destroy their false places of worship, or their places of false worship. And you drive these people out. You don't let them live. You don't intermarry with them. You don't let them live with you. You don't live with them. There is a separation between you and them. And if you don't do that, you will suffer. They'll be like thorns in your eyes, stings in your sides. And he says, I will do to you what I intended to do to them. If you continue reading in the Old Testament, you begin to realize the Israelites never finished what they should have done. They did not obey this commandment. And eventually, the 10 northern tribes were conquered by Assyria. The remaining southern tribes were conquered by Babylon. They were taken out of their holy land. They were sent into captivity. And there in captivity, some of them repented and got real with God. And a tiny remnant left the former lands of captivity after 70 years of captivity and returned and rebuilt Jerusalem. That's the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, by the way, and the prophetic Old Testament books of Haggai and Zechariah. But the judgments and the horrible things that happened to them because they did not obey this law. There's a lesson in that for you and me, you know. We don't intermix with false gods, false acts of worship. You know, you don't mix the true worship of Yahweh with the New Age movement. Yeah. You don't mix true worship of God with necromancers and spiritualists and Ouija boards and astrology and divination and all this kind and false prophets making predictions. You just don't do that. Read the Word. Let God tell you what to do from the Word. Thanks.